Hey everybody, I'm Mark Walters with BigFanboy.com and the Angelica blog, and I'm sitting here with the wonderful Bennett Miller. Thank you very much for coming to Dallas. It's great to have you back in our city, and for bringing this film. I know this was not an easy journey for you, and I'm very happy to see that you were able to get it finished and get it done. Being able to see the end result and also being able to engage an audience last night that way and hear some of the feedback and everything, I would imagine that really is kind of the cherry on top of the process, to know like the effect that it's having on people. Like, what are some of the things that you learned from being able to get feedback from people like that?
I'm always curious to see how people relate to the film, how the film, seems to have some kind of personal significance, because it is such a weird story. It's such an odd story about this extremely wealthy, eccentric guy, John DuPont, who was one of the wealthiest men in America, who had inherited this wealth, and these struggling brothers, these wrestlers who come from the middle of the country. And what does that story have to do with, me or anybody in the audience? So whenever people pick up on some of the undercurrents and themes of the story, which I do think are familiar.
Yeah, I mean, even the character of John, as crazy and as eccentric as he is, there's moments in the film where I found myself thinking, like the scene when he is kind of play wrestling with the guys. And I'm thinking, he's just trying to fit in because he just doesn't feel like he has the ability to be a normal guy. Or even like the scene with where he's wrestling, in the match. It's like he just wants to feel like one of these guys. And so in a way, it's like you really can't help but feel sorry for him because you see what a lonely and disconnected existence this guy has.
Yes.
And I guess that plays off of what you were mentioning last night about how Steve Carell was when he was on set, he was very disconnected and like not talking to Channing ahead of time.
Correct.
Things like that.
Yeah, I think as wealthy as John DuPont was, as privileged a life as he lived, I do think that he was a very lonely guy and a very alienated guy and wanted to fit in and wanted to be part of something, but was also cursed with some kind of a notion about what his role should be, given his lineage, that he should, because of his wealth and his name perhaps, be the leader of these guys who he is totally unqualified to lead. So on the one hand, you can sympathize with him, and on the other hand, you realize that there's something awfully dangerous that's mounting.
Yeah, and we've all had those moments of like the moment when his mother comes in the room and showing off for a parent and things like that. And I think it also translates in the scene when he talks about getting rid of the horse trophies because he, that means nothing to him, and he's trying to find desperately that thing that means something, to latch onto.
He's one of these characters who is not at home. He's not in a world where he belongs, and he is hatching these ambitions with the hopes that he's going to remedy, his life somehow, and makes a mess out of it.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I enjoy a lot about your films is that you manage to take actors that we don't necessarily see capabilities with, that maybe that we aren't aware that can go to certain places. Like, I think in a lot of ways you were the man that showed us that Philip Seymour Hoffman what exactly he could do when you made Capote, and then like with Jonah Hill and Moneyball, nobody expected Jonah Hill could pull off that performance. Right. What was it that you saw in both Channing Tatum and Steve Carell for these parts? Because, I mean, immediately when you look at those guys, you don't think these roles. You don't think that they could pull off these roles.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I look at both of those guys. I look at Channing Tatum and I look at Steve Carell and think that they're enormously talented people. And I'm always curious, I think, and looking for the potential that's never been sought out of them, the thing that they've never had the opportunity to do.
Right.
And so, I mean, just generally, I believe that about people anyway, that given the right opportunity, people will surprise you. And it wasn't a huge stretch for me to imagine these guys being able to do what they could do.
Well, and they also say that, you know, if you can tackle comedy, that the drama is actually it's not as comedy is one of the hardest things to do. So these guys obviously proved themselves to be good comedic actors.
Yeah.
Yeah. So taking them into that realm, I think, was very interesting.
I
Very
think
inspiring.
so. I think comic actors often have a dark side that they keep guarded from public view, and are very, very aware, very familiar with some of these dramatic currents that they can tap into. And you've seen it before, you know, with comic actors making that turn.
Yeah. There's a couple scenes in particular I wanted to talk about. I want to talk about the hotel scene, sort of the combination of him sort of dealing with what's going on and then binging and all that. I'm sure that had to be a difficult scene to kind of stage and get it just right. And I think I'm going to ask what everybody else wants to know. Did Channing hurt himself at that moment? Because it certainly looks like he might have.
Yeah, so that scene, the scene where Channing, you know, beats himself up and gorges and puts his head through the wall, was one take.
Wow.
It was just one take. Part of the reason it was one take was because I think he only had one take in him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he did injure himself a little bit, but you know.
Yeah. Well, and then also kind of that first meeting moment between Steve Carell and Channing Tatum when they first interact with each other. There's a wonderful tension that comes with that I think also kind of it sort of sets the tone for the film in this very sort of foreboding, bleak, you know, aspect of these two guys. Was that always played the same way? Did you guys try that in different ways, or I'm curious, how much did you stick to the script, and was there any room for improvisation? But that scene in particular, like their first meeting, was that always played that same way?
Well, it was the first scene that we shot, and it often happens, as was with this film, that the first 2 weeks you're trying to, you know, get on your feet and find your legs. So we did a lot of coverage, and you know, we tried a lot of things and did a lot of improv. But it turns out that we learned so much along the way as we shot that we wanted to return to it, and it's the only scene that we reshot. And it did take us a while to kind of find what that scene was meant to be.
Yeah. Also wanted to talk to you about the dynamics of when you're working with makeup. Does that make things a little more problematic in terms of the performances, or do you think that it allowed the actor, or in this case Steve Carell, to be able to use that to come up with different things?
Yeah, no, I mean, the makeup was an essential piece to this. We worked with Bill Corso, who's a great makeup artist, really is an artist, and he developed this character. We all worked together over months as he, you know, worked on this character the same way Steve Carell worked on the character. He worked on this character, and we did, you know, many makeup tests and camera tests. And when it's done, the result is something that absolutely facilitates a performance, and not the opposite. So when Steve is in that makeup, it really affects him, and it also affects others, which, you know, helps the whole thing.
Yeah, and you mentioned last night you worked closely with the real Mark Schultz and with Nancy, the widow, Dave's widow in real life. Can you talk a little bit about maybe their perceptions or their reactions when they saw the finished film, and were there certain things that maybe were a little more close to home? I mean, I'm sure the whole thing is close to home for them, but were there certain things where they just told you, like, you captured that more perfectly than we could have ever imagined, or certain scenes that really stood out to them?
I mean, generally they've been extremely supportive of the film, and have each seen it multiple times, and I think the killing is a difficult thing because it does, make real, the reminder of what happened. So they joke about it, like, we love the movie, don't love the ending. Don't like seeing what happened.
But it's
Dave.
essential to the. Yeah.
It's not that they disapprove. It's hard to look at.
Yeah. I think it's a magnificent work, and I want to let everybody know it is playing November 26th at the Angelica. Be looking for information down below on where you can see it near you. And thank you so much for bringing this to Dallas. It's great to have you here, and I hope that you come back, not just for another Super Bowl.
Back for the barbecue.
Absolutely, come back for the barbecue, yes.